Israel and Hamas both say they want a ceasefire. But does that mean they want an end to this horrible war? Well, if you look at the details of each side's ceasefire proposal, you get a window beyond the politics and spin into what each side really wants, and whether an end to the war is on the horizon. The first big question is, how long should a ceasefire last? Israel says 6 weeks. Hamas says it should go on indefinitely. Well, if we all want an end to the war, Hamas has the right idea, right? But pay attention to what Hamas is not asking for: mutual recognition and peace between Israelis and Palestinians. Why? Well, Hamas doesn't actually want an end to war, they just want an end to this war. Remember, Hamas is committed to Israel's complete destruction and the establishment of an Islamic State in its place. They see Israel as a colonialist entity that must be removed no matter what, which means they have every intention of starting another war as soon as they have time to regroup and rebuild.
لازم نأدبها وحنأدبها مرة ثانية وثالثة ومش هذا حتكون طوفان الأقصى أول مرة لا حتكون ثانية وثالثة ورابعة لأنه إحنا لدينا إصرار ولدينا قرار ولدينا إمكانيات. So you might say that Hamas is pro-ceasefire but anti-peace, and Israel kind of wants the opposite. That's why Israel's only proposing a 6-week ceasefire, with possible extensions. Israel might be willing to push pause if it'll free some hostages, but that's it. Because Israel isn't interested in ending this war only to restart another one in a few years. No, Israel won't agree to end the war until Hamas is destroyed and the hostages are freed. Remember, Israel has already fought several wars in Gaza that left Hamas in power. For Israelis, the only long-term solution is getting rid of Hamas. The second issue up for negotiation is whether Israel will withdraw its troops from Gaza during a ceasefire. Hamas says, yeah, it wants the IDF out, which makes practical sense if this ceasefire is the end of the war. Because if the war ends with Israeli soldiers in Gaza, their presence would only be an expansion of this so-called colonialist entity, and a constant reminder to Gazans of the failures of October 7th. So what's Israel's position on a troop withdrawal? Well, it's evolved. Until recently, Israel was completely opposed. Thousands of Israeli soldiers fought brutal battles to remove Hamas, city by city, block by block, building by building. If Israel pulls out, even temporarily, Hamas would come right back in, and then more Israeli soldiers will have to lose their lives doing it all over again. But recently, Israel seems to be showing some willingness to compromise. See, now that the IDF has decimated the terror group's infrastructure in all but one southern city, Israel says it's entering a new phase of the war, focused on precision raids. In fact, the IDF has already withdrawn most of its forces from Gaza, with only a single battalion securing a road that bisects the Strip. Still, Israel doesn't seem willing to agree to the full withdrawal that Hamas wants. Even if a ceasefire deal can save the lives of hostages, it may not be worth it if it means putting soldiers at greater risk when the war inevitably restarts. The next big issue is the return of displaced Gazans to northern Gaza. See, Israel started its invasion in the north, encouraging the people living there to head south. As part of a ceasefire deal, Hamas wants those people to return home right away. Which makes sense until you consider that for most of those people, their homes are gone. Civilian infrastructure has been wiped out, and it's extremely difficult to secure aid shipments into northern Gaza. The area needs a lot of help before it can take in 1 million homeless people. So what's Hamas's rush? Well, on the surface, it's a popular position among Gazans who are desperate to get back home. They're living in terrible conditions, crowded into tents and makeshift structures. The people want to return, and Hamas wants what the people want, right? But let's not be naive. Hamas has one primary goal for this war: survival. They must continue to rule Gaza so they can continue their long-term goal to establish a Palestinian Islamic State from the river to the sea. Moving civilians back into northern Gaza means being able to also move fighters back and re-establishing control there. More importantly, civilians are a critical military asset for Hamas. I know, that sounds awful, because, well, it is awful, but it's true. Hamas thrives when it can use Gazan civilians as human shields. Until now, Hamas's attempts to return north have not gone well. When they tried to re-establish a command center and a hospital in northern Gaza, the IDF re-entered the hospital,
killing or capturing hundreds of Hamas fighters and several senior Hamas leaders. Clearly, Hamas needs its human shields back in place before it's safe for their fighters to return to the streets, command centers, and rocket launchers. So what does Israel think about letting Gazans return north? This is another point where Israel has seriously compromised. At first, Israel was completely against North Gazans returning. Then Israel said, fine, we'll allow women and children, but no men, which clearly wasn't going to fly. Then a limited number of men can come too. And finally, Israel recently said it would let everyone return gradually, offering to move troops 500 meters from the main north-south roads. So why all the compromise by the Israelis? Well, the Israeli defense establishment has said that the achievements of the IDF up until now gives Israel more flexibility in ceasefire negotiations. I guess that's one way to spin it. Or perhaps it really just shows how much Israel's willing to concede in order to get hostages home. Either way, there's still not enough flexibility to withdraw completely. The IDF chief of staff told reporters that no matter what, the IDF will maintain security control in Gaza. Next up, humanitarian aid and reconstruction. There's no doubt that Gaza needs more aid, and Israel isn't waiting for a ceasefire deal. After a horrible accidental bombing of a humanitarian aid convoy, Israel, under international pressure, immediately began increasing the entry of humanitarian aid to Gaza, even opening up a new crossing straight to northern Gaza. But there's also the question of reconstruction. Clearly, rebuilding Gaza is going to be an enormous project. Who's going to pay for it? Several Gulf states have expressed willingness to contribute to the effort, but only after a real peace deal is signed that creates the long-sought Palestinian state and finally ends the war between Israel and Palestinians. It makes sense. Why would they invest in new buildings when it's likely Hamas will commandeer those buildings and continue its war against Israel, inevitably leading to the destruction of those buildings? Of course, Hamas likes the idea of reconstruction sooner rather than later. Good for the people, good for PR. But also, by pushing the international community to rebuild, they're hoping donor countries will want to protect their investments and will try to keep Israel from bombing Gaza in the next war. But the very, very sad truth is that so long as Hamas remains in power and remains sworn to Israel's destruction, Gaza could remain largely covered in rubble for a very long time. Finally, how many hostages and prisoners will be released in a deal? This is the big one for Israel. On October 7th, Hamas took 253 hostages back to Gaza. 129 are still there, and Israel wants them back yesterday. For Israel, the hostages are the main reason to even consider a ceasefire deal. It's why Israel's been so willing to compromise on all the other issues, because everything else being offered from Israel's side are just concessions to Hamas's demands in order to free the hostages. In the current negotiations, Israel is insisting on the release of at least 40 living hostages in the first phase of a ceasefire, with the possibility of extending the ceasefire if more hostages are going to be released. The thing is, when Hamas releases hostages, it doesn't want to release captured soldiers, current or former, instead preferring to release women, children, and some elderly. But Hamas is now claiming that it no longer has 40 living hostages left from those categories. Israel says it doesn't believe this claim, and even if it's true, Israel insists that Hamas makes up the difference with male hostages. But so far, Hamas has been unwilling to compromise. Meanwhile, in exchange for releasing Israeli hostages, Hamas wants Israel to release Palestinian prisoners, including those convicted of murder. Remember, freeing Palestinian prisoners was the whole reason Hamas wanted to kidnap Israelis in the first place, so they don't want the war to end until they've delivered on that promise. Why the focus on Palestinian prisoners? Well, beyond the obvious, during the last ceasefire in November, polls showed support for Hamas spiked as Palestinian terrorists were released from Israeli prisons. Since then, approval for Hamas has been dropping again, but analysts believe another hostage/prisoner swap could bring another popularity boost for Hamas, something they'll need if they want to maintain control of Gaza and continue on the path of jihad. In exchange for the 40 hostages, Israel was originally willing to release 700 Palestinian terrorists, including some serving life sentences. As negotiations continued, that number went up to 900, including 100 serving life sentences. But Israel is demanding the right to veto some of the names Hamas wants released. I mean, Let's not forget what happened in 2011, when Israel released over 1,000 Palestinian prisoners in exchange for one Israeli soldier. That 1,000 to 1 swap created a really dangerous incentive structure that arguably helped motivate the kidnappings on October 7th. Plus, one of those 1,000 prisoners freed in 2011 turned out to be the mastermind of the October 7th massacre. So while Israel is still willing to release prisoners in exchange for hostages, it doesn't want to end up repeating past mistakes. Overall, the two sides still have some significant gaps to resolve before we can expect a deal. But a ceasefire deal won't end the war because, well, neither side really wants to end the war. Israel won't stop fighting until all the hostages are freed and Hamas is wiped out. Hamas won't stop fighting until Israel is wiped out. So in all likelihood, they'll have to keep on battling it out until one side is victorious. And until then, too many civilians will continue to be caught in the crossfire.